For years, and I wouldn't say every year, but most years, I have used for my own personal devotions Faith Baptist and Ankeny Through the Bible in a Year schedule, where you read 2 chapters in the Old Testament every day and 1 chapter in the Psalm, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon area every weekday, 1 chapter, and the New Testament, 1 chapter every weekday, and you can make it through the Bible in a year. And so today's, I had planned somebody else until I was reading the devotions this morning, and usually I don't preach off of my devotions, and I got to thinking about it, and it happened to fall on Second Samuel chapter 11 and 12 today. And is anybody, without looking at it right now, what's in chapter 11 of 2 Samuel? 2 Samuel, chapter 11. It's something you all know that happened here, an amazing thing. Well, along with that, I was reading Acts chapter 12. That was the place in the New Testament, Acts chapter 12, verse 1. Let me just read the first 3 verses of that, and then I'll go to back to 2 Samuel. Now about this time, Herod the king stretched forth his hand to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of the unleavened bread. Here, my dad was a fan of Zane Grey, the old westerns. If any of you have ever read any of the Zane Grey westerns, but one of the things that was kind of funny, I decided I would read some of those one time, and I got halfway through the book, and the hero gets killed. I was like, what kind of deal is this? That's not supposed to happen. And here, James is one of the inner circle, and it just says here, stretched forth his hand, and he killed James. Bam, he's gone. One of the inner circle. Okay, now go back to 2 Samuel chapter 11. Anybody has skimmed over, you realize what's happened here is David and Bathsheba. Okay? When I picked out an individual to talk about tonight, it wasn't the one that I started out with. It was Uriah the Hittite. Okay? And think about that. The Hittites were from the tribe of Ham. You remember there was Shem, Japheth, and Ham. Ham was the one that was the Canaanites, and they were the rebels. He was from that. In Genesis chapter 10, verse 15, it talks about him being a Canaanite. Esau, in his lifetime, married the 2 Hittite wives. The Hittites were ones who fought against Israel when they came to the Promised Land. They were in the Promised Land, and they weren't eradicated or driven out in Joshua's day. You remember the Israelites, when they came there, they were supposed to drive out all of these people because they would end up influencing them. And they were ones that were not eradicated. They ended up intermarrying with the Israelites. And then we come across, and here is Uriah the Hittite, who was in David's army. And he's a loyal soldier. Okay? Now, there is one wrong after another in David's situation. And sin has a way of compounding itself, right? When you do one thing, then you have to do another, and then you do another, and you get deeper and deeper in debt, as it would be. David had sent Joab and his army to fight the Ammonites. If you look at that, and it says, and it came to pass after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab. He didn't go forth to battle. Mistake number, or error number one. Okay. Then it says that David tarried in Jerusalem. That was wrong. He should have been with his kingdom. Later on, when he became old, then they had told him about not going with them, and because it would be dangerous, but not at this time. And so, what is the situation? It came to pass in the eventime that David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful. Second wrong. Okay. He's a peeping Tom. Okay. And he sees this woman. Number three, he asked who the woman was. Wrong. Okay. He should have never asked. I mean, it should have been done. You can see that there were chances, and he kept on and moved on. He sent messengers. He found out, he asked who she was, and he found out she's married to somebody else. And then he sent messengers to get her. Wrong. Number four. Then it says he lay with her. Wrong, number five. And then he tried to cover it up. Wrong, number six. Now, you think about the cover-up plot. David is in over his ears. And so he thought, if he finds out that Bathsheba is pregnant, Uriah hasn't been with Bathsheba, so the best thing he can do is he's got to get Uriah to come home. Uriah's got a beautiful wife waiting for him, and he's in the army. And probably most of the guys that are in the army, I've never been in the army, but I'm sure that most of their thinking time is looking forward to being at home with their family, okay? So the idea is, if I bring him home, and David had him come home and brought a big mess of food for him to take home to his wife, and the idea here is, if he's with her, then everybody would assume that it was his child. And you would have thought that if he would have had the chance to go home, that he would have taken full advantage of it. And that would have been the normal thing. She was beautiful, but he didn't go home. And so, if you read this portion of Scripture, you'll see that what he did is he upped the ante. He fed him, he got him drunk. Now he's not, maybe in control of all of his faculties. Now he'll go home to his wife, but he didn't. So David thinks there's only one thing left to do. He sends them back to the battle with instructions to set them up to be killed. And Uriah is killed. Bathsheba mourns, and then David takes her to be his wife. Now, no one's going to be the wiser. He's covered all of his bases. What about Bathsheba in this situation? To a point, in those days, women didn't have a lot of say. You remember Esther? And of course, Esther was married to a foreign king, but Esther wasn't even able, supposedly, to go in to talk to her husband. If he didn't bid her to come in, he could have her killed. And technically, women's rights were not that strong at that time. However, according to Jewish law, if you look at Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 22, there it says, if a man be found lying with a woman married to a husband, when they shall both of them, then they shall both of them die, both the one man that lay with the woman and the woman, so shalt thou put away evil from Israel. Technically, they should have both been stoned in that situation, but it was covered up. It is interesting about Uriah's unusual loyalty and commitment as a soldier. What caused Uriah to have that kind of loyalty? He said, I can't go home to my wife when the other rest of the soldiers are out there on the battlefield. I think God had a hand in that, because Uriah wasn't acting naturally like we would expect him to. And it kind of reminds us that sometimes we can try to cover things up, and it doesn't work, does it? There are some verses that we can look at. Galatians 6:7 says, be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever man sows, that shall he also reap. Be sure your sins will find you out. We know that. And sometimes God has a way of having people respond in an unusual way. So what were the consequences of that? Well, if you look in 2 Samuel chapter 12, and the Lord sent Nathan unto David, and he came unto him and said unto him, there were two men in the city, the one rich and the other poor. And you remember the story, how the rich man had exceeding many flocks and herds, and the poor man had nothing save one little ewe lamb, which he had bought and nourished up, and it grew up together with him and with his children. It did eat with his own meat and drank his own cup and lay in his bosom and was unto him as a daughter. And there came a traveler unto the rich man, and he spared to take of his own flock and of his own herd to dress for the wayfaring man that was come unto him, but took the poor man's lamb and dressed it for the man that was come to him. And David's anger was kindled greatly against the man. And he said to Nathan, as the Lord liveth, that man that has done this thing shall surely die. He shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing and because he had no pity. And Nathan said to David, thou art the man. And he exposed him. Well, there were consequences. And we know some of the consequences. The first one was the child died. David mourned for that child and prayed and fasted. That when the child died, they were afraid to tell David, because they thought maybe he would really go off the deep end, and David cleaned himself up and went and worshiped the Lord. And they said, how come? And he said, well, if there was a chance that God would change his mind, I was going to do whatever I can, but he didn't. And there's a phrase there, I don't know if we sometimes take it out of context, but David says, he can't come to me, but I can go to him. And they're talking about the fact that he's going to go to heaven with him. I'm not so sure that they're not reading into it more than the fact that the child is not going to be alive again, but he is going to be dead. I'm not holding out on anything. And as a result, there was he said, you're going to have rebellion in your family. And we know that there was Amnon that raped his sister, half-sister. Absalom's rebellion. Absalom killed Ammon, and then Absalom's rebellion. Later on, Adonijah, another one of David's sons, rebelled against David, and there was that rebellion in the house. But ironically, in all of that, in the grace of God, Solomon came out of that union. And you can only say that was of the grace of God. There's no way you can explain that other than the grace of God. And the fact that we can, I can't comprehend it. I really can't. Now, we don't know if Uriah was a believer or not. There's nothing that we have in the account about his relationship with God. But what would it be like if they met in heaven, David and Uriah? Would have been interesting. A few weeks ago when we had our rallies, and Randy King was our speaker for it, he had mentioned that when we try to be judgmental about other people, that every one of us has 5 minutes in our life that we would give anything if we could change. Some of us have longer than that. But things in our lives. Corey and I have a Bible study every week, and we were talking, and we've discussed the fact that Corey worked at the prison in Black River Falls, and there's a big issue there about trying to cut down on the drugs in the prison system. You no longer can send a letter to a prisoner, because some people had gotten the idea that you could take the letter, you could write a letter to someone, soak it in drugs, mail it to them, and they would suck on the paper to get the drugs out of the paper. So now they photocopy it and send in the photocopy. But on their attempt to do that, I have been going to see a guy in the Red Granite prison for a while, and all of a sudden they changed all the rules again. And my technological knowledge is limited. My granddaughter has been working with me this, but so far we have not been able to get me rescheduled so that I can go in and see this guy. But the sad thing of it is, the greatest amount of the drugs going into the prison is from their own staff. And Corey and I were talking about that, and it come to the conclusion, usually the only difference between the guards and the prisoners is the guards haven't been caught yet. Okay. And truthfully, that's the situation with all of us. You know, we hear about somebody that's gotten into a lot of problems and a lot of trouble, and they've done something wrong. Kids going down to the principal's office today at school are saying, I didn't do anything wrong, you know. In my day, when I got sent to the principal's office, I wondered, what did they catch me at? And when they would tell me what they call it, oh, is that all? Oh, I thought you saw me. No, anyway. But the truth is, it's only by the grace of God any of us are going to get to heaven. We got to realize that. I got to thinking about that, you know, in all of God's grace and that, and the fact that he provided Solomon, when God asked him what he could give him, and he asked for wisdom, and because God was pleased with Solomon, what he asked for, he also blessed him with wealth and all these other things. But God also knew the end of Solomon, where he had all these women, you know. It's not like the little girl when they asked him how come Solomon was so wise. He says because he had all those wives to advise him. It's not true at all. But the thing was, God knew what Solomon was going to end up. And it's amazing that God is willing to put up with any of us, isn't it? Because we will have moments when we are faithful to God and we're doing it all. But boy, the devil doesn't have to do a whole lot to get us upset and get us critical of others in our own lives. Some of us here probably can identify with David because of what we might have done to others. And there may be some of us here that might be able to relate with Uriah, wondering why some things have happened to us. Okay? That somebody else pulled some strings and we didn't know. What was that all about? You think about that in the Bible, there are other ones like that. How about John the Baptist? Being very faithful to God. One day, gets his head chopped off. Someday in heaven or in hell, we'll understand it all. And I'd like to think that all of us are going to be in heaven. But the truth is, whether we end up in heaven or hell, we're going to understand it all. And if we're in heaven, we'll know beyond a shadow of a doubt we don't deserve to be here. If we end up in hell, we'll know beyond a shadow of a doubt we deserve to be there. That's the way it is. And so I know that's not a very uplifting kind of a sharing about it, but sometimes realistically, when we think about individuals in the Bible, remember that God preserved this account because he wanted us to know it. Wouldn't you think God would have wanted to cover it up? I've heard preachers that have said, well, if you're doing God's work, he'll overlook things. And that's not true, folks. In the Bible, God exposes when people did wrong, he exposed it. That we understand that they're feet of clay. And here's David, who wrote most of the Psalms and was the only man in the Bible that was a person referred to both in the New and the Old Testament as a man after God's own heart. And yet we look at this and see that he had feet of clay just like we did. The grace of God. Okay. I trust the challenge to you.